Good evening, everybody. You're here for our Bridging the Divide series, and we're going to have a presentation tonight. But just to set things regarding our organization clear to you, those of you who do not know about us, we're formerly the Casa de la Luz Foundation. We're now called Roots and Roads Community Hospice Foundation. And we do a number of different things in the community. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, our foundation vision is to transform the end-of-life experience into the final act of living well. A couple of ways we do go about doing this is by providing financial assistance to hospice patients and their families of limited means to help meet basic needs while they're going through the end of life. And also end-of-life education, which is why we're all gathered here tonight. And these are the three missions that we have: provide supplemental support, educate the community, and support the community. And we'll talk a little bit later about our newest resource, the Crosswalk. Next slide. And the newest endeavor that we have that I referred to for the end-of-life community is our online resource we're calling the Crosswalk. Now, the Crosswalk is interesting. It's actually a cornucopia of information regarding end-of-life issues. It's an online resource to help walk folks through the time of diagnosis, through end-of-life and beyond. And for those loved ones that are left behind who are grieving and trying to make final arrangements, etc. We have put in, our staff that you see here has put in a great deal of effort to bring this around, and it's growing every day. We're getting multiple resources from the community and putting them into the format of being available through online contact. We would love you to navigate around the Crosswalk and provide us with feedback to make it as holistic, inclusive, and robust as possible. And you can see at the bottom here, we have the URL for that. It's rootsandroads.org, the Crosswalk. I'll now turn things over to David Fife, who is our Director of Community Engagement. David?
Thanks so much, Alan. And we're so grateful that everyone's here with us tonight to take part in this conversation. And that Zander Masser is with us and offering a presentation entitled Unburying My Father. Before we begin with that, we want to take a moment and thank our sponsors who have made this year's series possible. The Pima Council on Aging is an amazing partner here in southeastern Arizona. Its mission is to promote dignity and respect for aging and to advocate for independence in the lives of Pima County's older adults and their families. They offer amazing programs and services for older adults, and we are so grateful for their collaboration with us on many, many occasions. And we also, another sponsor of ours that have made this possible is Right at Home, in-home care and assistance. Right at Home has for decades provided exceptional service to this community, helping people live independently. They've been here to ensure safety and well-being. They're a wonderful partner for us as well, and a resource for this whole community. So we thank PCOA and Right at Home for making this possible. Zander Masser is with us tonight and going to offer a presentation and help with a conversation from his own experience and how that resonates in our lives as well. As you can see, he's an occupational therapist, husband, father, musician, and he authored a narrative photography book, Unburying My Father, that he will talk about tonight, and telling the story of his father, Randy, who died in 2000 from AIDS-related illnesses. This experience of working on this project was transformative for Zander. and exploring what it's like to live with and heal from grief. This creative process enlightened his own understanding of his relationship with his father, but also his own relationship with the grief that he was going through. We hope that this will help us all as we think about our own grieving process and as we support others in our lives who are experiencing that as well. But Zander, we are so grateful for your presence here with us tonight, and we'll turn things over to you now.
Zander, you're muted.
Can you hear me now? And can you just confirm that you can see the title page? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, everything looks great. Everything looks great.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you all for having me. And I look forward to chatting with anyone who wants to chat after the presentation. And so I will jump right in. On a fall day in 1996, my parents called a family meeting. I was 11 years old, my brother was 14, and we were in the living room. I sat on the green pleather couch next to my brother and across from my parents, and my mom was on the left, my dad was on the right. There was an air of seriousness in the room, and that was really uncharacteristic for my household, and so I knew something was wrong. I thought they were going to tell us that they were getting a divorce. I couldn't imagine anything worse than that. My mom did most of the talking. They told us that my dad had been HIV positive for over 10 years, which was my entire life, and that he had AIDS. They told us that he had become infected with HIV through the medication used to treat his hemophilia. They assured us that my mom, my brother, and me were not infected. They also explained the terminal nature of the disease, but they tried to sound hopeful about my dad's treatments, his medications, and the excellent care he received at the Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. After that discussion, I knew that my dad was going to die, but I assumed it would be very far in the future, that my dad would be an old man by then. I lived in denial, even as my dad's health declined over the following 3 years. After that family discussion, the topic of my dad's death was not discussed again until the day he died. I didn't know it at the time, but my grief started on the day of this family meeting. My dad died at the start of my adolescence, and while I remained a functional teenager at school and in my social life, my home life crumbled. My brother went off to college, leaving just my mom and me in the house, and inside the house, I was depressed. I moped around, I slept a lot, and I directed all of my anger towards my mom. Eventually, I moved out to go to college, and as I entered my 20s, my pain and my anger transformed into this quiet acceptance in which I spoke to almost no one about what I had been through. But my internal dialogue remained very loud as I churned my brain, asking myself a question that most young adults ask themselves: who am I and why? For me, the answer that continuously came was, I am who I am because my dad died. I am a grieving person, and my grief informs all that I am. I was always really good at hiding my sadness, and so nobody knew about my experience. But in my mind, my dad's death had come to define me as a person. Finally, in my 30s, a different way of moving through my loss emerged as I embarked on the creative and healing journey that I'm currently on. Today, I'm going to take you on a journey in which I reunite with my father and ultimately with myself. This has taken the form of my book, which is titled Unburying My Father. As we move along together today, you're going to see my dad's photos and you'll hear stories about his life. Much of what you will see and hear are pages from that book. My dad, Randy Masser, lived with a rare bleeding disorder called hemophilia, which historically required regular treatments of blood transfusions. He was a professional photographer. I grew up surrounded by his photos on the walls of our home, and when I conjure images of him in my mind, which I do every day, it's hard to imagine him without a camera around his neck. A decade after my dad died, my brother and I went into the basement of our childhood home. That's where my dad spent much of his time, in his studio and in his dark room. We were looking for an opportunity to reconnect with him, to see what he left behind. We discovered thousands of photos, prints, slides, sheets of negatives, and old photography gear buried amongst the rubble. We began just by holding individual slides up to the light to view the photos. Just looking at them in this way, we were enchanted by the imagery, and we decided that we really wanted to share his photos with the world. So we got a few hundred slides scanned professionally, and we talked periodically, but nothing really materialized. We both lived far from home, and personally, I was not emotionally ready to start this kind of project. And so my dad's photos kind of remained mostly untouched. Fast forward another few years, that childhood home was sold, and the photo collection was boxed up and moved to different locations several times. My dad's legacy was disorganized in boxes and shuffled around houses in New York. Eventually, a cousin of mine gifted me an old slide scanner, and that prompted me to collect all of the photos and take them home with me. I began scanning and organizing the entire collection. I found myself committed to this process in a relentless way. I scanned 10,000 slides. I created a digital and physical archive of my dad's entire life's work. This was when the question that would bloom into my project came to me. How can I share my dad's work if nobody knew who he was? He was not a famous artist. The answer to me was to share his life story. And sadly, I realized I just didn't know that much about his life story. I was a kid when he died. I never had the chance to speak to him from an adult perspective, and after he died, there wasn't all that much talk about his life because the focus was so much more on how to cope with his death. So I compiled a list of every person I could think of that knew my dad. So that was family, friends, colleagues, and healthcare professionals. I asked them to share their memories of my dad with me. I asked them for stories and not descriptions. And I also shared some writing prompts to get their memories flowing. Some examples of the prompts I gave them were, tell me about the first time you met, a time you belly laughed with him, the moment you found out he was HIV positive, the moment you found out that he died. Tell me about your experience at his funeral. The response I got was astounding, and I found myself transported into my dad's life as the stories flooded my inbox. I felt like I was in the room with him as I cried and laughed, usually at the same time, through each anecdote. I read the stories many times, and when I went through all 10,000 slides, which I did a few times, certain photos would trigger my memory of a specific story. My dad, he was a master of photographing the everyday scenes of life that we normally take for granted. And I started to see a connection between his lived experience and the images that he captured with his camera. As the stories rolled in, I became enamored with my dad's personality. I was never old enough to be his friend, and the stories allowed me to feel this new type of closeness to him, the type that I always wanted to have. They also confirmed my memory of him being a very funny and universally loved person.
Randy made friends with people the way a lake reflects the sky. It can't help it.
Randy was on campus, and I got to spend a lot of time with him. He was a big personality in a small frame, and his friends called him the little king. He was the glue in the group. He brought a lot to the table. He'd be most likely to have the latest scoop on each of us. He kept track of everyone.
We had to drive up to Boston. We hit some traffic, and here we were, in traffic. He rolls down his window, and he's talking to the guy driving the car right next to us up in traffic. I remember him going, here, and he gave the guy an apple, just out of nowhere. That's who he was. He would just connect.
In the summer of '74, we began renting houses in Fire Isle in New York. Randy, Stewie and I, Tony and Maria, Mike and Iris Witt, and then Randy's cousin David joined us. The people across from us liked to fish and occasionally gave us some. One day, Randy took special care preparing a piece for himself. He left it in the kitchen and announced he was going to take a nap before dinner. He was sound asleep and showed no signs of getting up before morning. So the rest of us ate, and we just couldn't resist. We ate his fish. Hours later, after we had eaten, cleaned up, and were hanging out, Randy woke up. He arrived in the kitchen saying he couldn't wait to eat his fish. No one had the heart to tell him. Instead, we told him his fish was in the drawer. We laughed as he went from drawer to drawer. He couldn't believe that we could have actually eaten it. He was pretty pissed. From then on, whenever anyone misplaced something, we all had the answer. It must be in the drawer with Randy's fish.
A few of us were in our truck. We had been to a barbecue at the highway barn. Suddenly, we were off-road, driving through the woods, and the song Layla came on the radio. Bryce stopped the truck, and we all got out and started air guitaring and dancing, some on the hood and roof of the truck. Long song over, we got back in and were on our way. Only a couple of years before he died, the phone rang. It was Randy. He was driving along FDR Drive, and Layla came on the radio. He just had to call.
I also felt a deep sadness for my dad, as I also learned about the lifelong assault of illnesses on his body. His life began with a trauma from his circumcision. His parents lived in constant fear for his health and safety, and like so many other children with hemophilia during the 1950s, he spent much of his childhood in the hospital. He wore braces on his legs, and he was prohibited from playing sports and other physical activities.
I remember that Aunt Elle was going to take us to the Statue of Liberty, and we were playing outside in the apartment, and Dad jumped up on the bench and fell over and banged his knee, and it blew up like a balloon. And that was the first time I actually realized that he was sick.
My father was in casts, and I had to bring him, to the hospital. He was in the hospital all the time, and I used to drive in every day, and he would say to me, "Mom, you don't have to come every day," when he was older. And I said, "I do have to come every day. First of all, not only to see my son, there were children there whose parents never came to see them. And that used to hurt me."
We were in the Pathmark supermarket near CW Post. Randy and I were talking. He told me he did not expect to live to be 30 and knew he would never be married or have children.
You know, he got one of his attacks, you know, and he couldn't walk or anything. So we went down the elevator, you know, our apartment, and then I literally carried him to the car, put him in the car, and literally carried him into the hospital.
He had a really hard time taking his meds. There were just too many fucking pills.
I felt proud of my dad as I learned that despite his hemophilia and his physical disability, he had tons of friends and went to college. He lived independently and eventually became a self-employed artist. I was peripherally aware that my dad was part of a hemophilia association, but I didn't know anything about his involvement. For this project, I spoke to a former executive director of the Hemophilia Association of New York. He told me that my dad was a board member for over 20 years and even served as the vice president for a time. He told me that my dad advocated for policies to protect and benefit individuals with hemophilia, that he led support groups for young adults with bleeding disorders and was often asked to counsel individuals and their families.
Well, he showed up for all of these board meetings, and we'd have every couple of months. And that one time he was there, and he was all kind of buckled up and huddled. You know, he had this coat, and I remember the hat on and kind of scarf wrapped around him, and you couldn't see who he was. But when it came time to say something, I mean, he said something. If I felt that sick, I probably wouldn't have come. But he did. You know, and it kind of makes me feel small.
As I learned more about my dad's activism, I came to really understand and internalize the story of the tainted blood tragedy. And at the same time, I gained a much broader view of the hemophilia population. For those of you who are not familiar, in the early 1980s, blood products used to treat hemophilia and other bleeding disorders were contaminated with hepatitis and HIV. During that time period, almost all people with hemophilia contracted hepatitis, and over 10,000 people just in the United States alone contracted HIV, and my dad contracted both. When my parents told my brother and me about his HIV status, they explained to us how he physically contracted it, but they didn't go into detail about the negligence, the skepticism, and the greed that led to his infection. Now that I've read and talked and written about what happened, I'm able to channel some of my anger more appropriately. In June of 2021, my daughter Eleanor was born here in a hospital in Montreal. I froze for a moment when I noticed on the IV drip bag that helped my wife bring our daughter into this world featured the logo of a company that participated in my dad's death. In this moment, I realized that I'll forever be tied to this tainted blood tragedy. In my small hometown in New York, my dad took portraits for many families, and I would often see those distinct pictures taken in our basement on the walls and shelves of other people's homes. His photos hung on the walls of our local library and town hall, and even in the local dentist's office. He was the photographer of our town. On each Little League opening day ceremony, my dad would be high up in a crane above the crowds, photographing all the action. Reviving my dad's photo collection helped me gain a deep appreciation and respect for his artistic talent and his prolific collection. Many people, including my grandparents, told me that they just didn't know where my dad's interest in photography came from. My dad participated in life as much as he could, but because of his physical limitations, he couldn't always engage the way others could, so he participated in his own way. As a kid, he would bat in baseball and another kid would run for him. As a young adult, he would manage high school sports teams instead of playing. And as a dad, he was the town's Little League equipment manager. Akin to having a heightened sense of hearing if you are blind, I think that his observation skills were sharpened by kind of always being on the sidelines and watching others move through the world in a way that he wasn't able to. This translates naturally to the camera lens. I think once he picked up a camera, he was naturally skilled at identifying and capturing elements of everyday life in a meaningful and artful way. It became his life's passion and his career. I'd like to take a minute just to show you a few of my favorites. It's hard to choose because there's so many, but these were all taken with film and developed by hand. As I pieced together my dad's life through stories, I reached the gaps that could really only be filled by one person: my mom. My mother shared incredibly vulnerable stories about the challenges of being my dad's partner and caregiver. She also told me that she waited 10 years to get tested for HIV. Despite living in constant fear, she just couldn't bear the prospect that my dad could have transmitted HIV to her and to their children. She finally decided to get tested so that they could confidently disclose my dad's HIV status.
I was taking a course in social work school called The Emotional Impact of Chronic Illness. As part of the course, we met with patients in healthcare settings who would talk to us about their illnesses. There was a hemophilia clinic at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, and on that day, we learned about hemophilia and how chronic episodes of bleeding lead to arthritis, swollen and stiff joints, and limited range of motion. Marvin Gilbert, your dad's orthopedist, showed us your dad's knees. I immediately fell in love with his knees.
This is an excerpt from a personal essay my mom wrote in the late 90s, just a few years before my dad died.
I was asked by a colleague recently who does not know Randy to describe what he looks like. I was surprised that this innocent question surfaced a lot of emotion for me that I normally keep private about his physical state. Randy right now needs to be preoccupied with maintaining whatever health he does have, making him emotionally unavailable and physically diminished. He is weaker and he is in visible pain. He's unable to do many things like walking, driving, lifting, carrying, reaching without great difficulty. He is physically diminished because his body and muscles are wasting away. I have a huge responsibility to keep this ship afloat. My sleep is disturbed every night by Randy's cough, his chest congestion, and discomfort. I've come to look at these sounds as sounds of life, even though they are so disturbing. There isn't a night that doesn't go by where I'm asking him if he needs something or if there's something I can do for him. One night last week, he was so cold, extremely cold in reaction to a new medication, and no amount of blankets helped. I went as far as asking him if he wanted me to lie on top of him to keep him warm. The reality is that I probably would have crushed him. The 4 days I spent waiting to get my HIV test results were by far the darkest time in my life. It was filled with indescribable despair, and I was confronted with my own mortality and Randy's as well. Randy and I would talk about his illness, but we did not talk about him dying. The last 2 years of his life were difficult for him in terms of feeling hopeful because he kept getting more and more infections. My job was to keep him motivated and positive. The last year of his life was probably the most difficult. He was so weak that it made him short of breath almost all the time. He cried when his hair fell out as a side effect of medication. Symbolically, it was a culmination of a lot of losses he had to face, including the prospect of losing his family and not being there for his boys.
In the years after his death, our intense grief, combined with my teenage angst and poor coping skills, made for a tense relationship between my mom and me. I directed my anger towards her. She projected her anxiety onto me. Through this project, my mom and I have finally started to talk about our relationship more openly and honestly. I've heard stories about her life with my dad that I had never heard before. I now have a clearer understanding of her experience and the incredible sacrifices and difficult choices she made. My grandmother felt immense guilt about passing this genetic disorder on to my father. She became a fierce advocate and a constant caregiver in his childhood. Later, my mother took over those roles. The challenges they faced became far more serious and devastating than they ever could have imagined. I imagine there are some caregivers listening right now, and I just want to acknowledge and thank all of you caregivers and family members and advocates for supporting those with chronic medical conditions and those who are going through their end of life process. You always give your all to your loved ones. Without my grandma and my mom and people like you, my dad wouldn't have lived the life he did, and I probably wouldn't be here today. Finally, the time came for me to document my own stories. I put on paper experiences that I had never shared with anyone. This was immensely cathartic. And as I placed my stories amongst all the others, I began to see how mine did not exist in isolation. Melding my stories with the others helped me to move away from the self-isolating behaviors of my past. I'm going to share some of my experiences that are written in the book. And I just want to note here that for the purposes of this talk, I'm deliberately sharing some of the more difficult stories that I wasn't able to share in the past, because that's what's been so helpful for me. But most of my memories with my dad are joyful. These are just the ones that I really needed to externalize. Walking with my dad was very slow. He couldn't rush even if he needed to. When I was a little kid, I used to walk with a fake limp so I could be like him. Towards the end of his life, I grew very protective and I'd walk slowly by his side all the time. The night before my dad died, I was in his hospital room, sitting on his bed and holding his hand. I told him I loved him, but he was in and out of consciousness. His eyes were opening and closing. He was having trouble keeping his head straight on his shoulders, and he couldn't respond to me. I could tell he was trying, but the disease and the medications had taken their toll. When I walked out, I was in a daze. My mom asked me if I was scared that he was going to die. I cried in her arms. I said yes. My mom and brother woke me up at 6 a.m. and told me the news that I feared was coming. My dad died early that morning at the hospital. It took a few minutes to sink in. Then the sensation I felt was as if someone stepped on my heart, applied pressure with a big boot, and did not let up. As my only defense, I cradled myself in my bed and I cried and screamed for many hours. In the fleeting moments of actual thought, all I could do was wonder how my life could possibly continue. It felt like the end. I was in the synagogue before the service began and before the masses of people arrived. Somebody asked me if I wanted to see my dad in the coffin. I said yes because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. I touched his arm. It was a frigid and scary touch. His arm was so cold and still. He was wearing his Yankee hat and a suit, and he had a camera around his neck. He certainly looked like my dad. The image of his body in the coffin remains vivid and clear in my mind today. I can easily step back into that moment at any time, and my mind often carries me there unwillingly. 3 weeks after I turned 14, I wrote my eulogy for my dad's funeral. On that day, I was not able to read it in front of the large crowd of people, so I had a family friend read it for me. Today, it's still difficult, but I am able to read it. Dear Father, I know you are in a better place now where no illness may harm you. I am proud of you, Father. You fought for yourself and your family as best as you could for 15 years. You are the bravest and strongest man I will ever know. I too am a fighter like you. Everything that you had in you, I now have in me. I have your strength and love in me, your intelligence and your loving heart inside of me, your will to live, your strength to never give up, and your kindness and love towards others. I have this and more all from you, Father. And from this, I realize you are not only my role model, but my hero in life. It makes me so proud and so happy when all of your friends and family tell me how great a man you are, how great a son and how great a dad you are, and how great a husband you are, and how everyone who knows you loves you, and how you never had anything bad to say about anyone. We are all going to miss you, Father, but you will be with all of us all of the time. You will be with me and Graham to help guide us through our lives. You will be here to guide Mom when she needs help. And you will guide your parents to live the rest of their lives to the fullest. I love you more than anyone else on this entire earth. I want to thank you for all the years of happiness, sadness, and laughter you have given us. These years will never be forgotten. I promise you that. I love you so much, Dad, your son, Zander. I've held my grief close to my chest for a long time. I spent close to 20 years in an almost constant state of processing, churning the impact of my dad's death on my life. The enormous mountain of grief that I climbed and continue to climb is what I focused on, and I was isolated. But this project has produced fundamental shifts in how I process my grief. Firstly, I found a way to externalize my experience, which is crucial for healing. And as I continue to share my story, I've found that the more vulnerable I am, the more love and support I receive, which is an invaluable lesson. Secondly, I pivoted from focusing on how my father's death shaped me to knowing that his life has had an even greater impact on me. I did find part of myself in my dad's death, but I have found much more of myself in his life. Day-to-day life has become easier in the years since my dad died, but the pain has never gone away. I feel the sting with every milestone. My wife, Katie, and I and our families all made the conscious decision to make my dad very present at our wedding in June of 2018. He was mentioned in every speech. After we kissed and walked down the aisle, Katie and I stepped into a private room just to be with each other for a few minutes before joining the party. As soon as we sat down, I burst into tears. I cried intensely in her arms for what felt like a very long time. I didn't need to explain to her why I was crying so hard. She knew. The happiest moments in my life are often the most painful because I can't share them with my dad. I wish he could be the amazing grandfather that I know he would have been to my nephew Miles and my daughter Eleanor. I can only imagine the incredible photos he would take of his grandchildren. Katie and I had Eleanor while I was deep in the throes of writing this book. When she was born, I did not feel my dad's absence as I had expected to. Instead, more than ever before, I felt surrounded by his presence. That sting had softened a little bit, and I believe that's a direct result of the healing nature of this project. Almost all of what I've shared with you about my dad today, I learned as a result of my reaching out and asking questions, reading and going through old family photos and documents. This project has surfaced so much information, so many realizations, and importantly, it's fostered many connections, both old and new. Illness was an important and constant part of my dad's life. His medical conditions impacted his every decision. My dad believed that he wouldn't live past the age of 30 or have children. Later on, he knew that his boys and his partner would eventually lose him. I am in awe of his resilience, his perseverance, and his ability to remain a positive force in the lives of so many people while his body was under assault. But I have also come to realize that he did not have the emotional space nor the language to talk about his mental health with his family or friends. Some people told me that he avoided talking about his illness and his fears of death. If he did break down at times, and who wouldn't, very few people ever saw it. That translated to his approach to parenting. My parents told us about his HIV/AIDS status, and the conversation stopped there. My mother told me that her job was to maintain positivity in our home. That was my dad's wish. But positivity took the form of silence around my dad's illness and looming death. I empathize with the challenge they faced, and I acknowledge both the context of stigma that they lived in and the incredible challenge of broaching this subject with children. But looking back, I do wish that my parents had talked to us openly about what was happening in their lives and inside our home. After my dad died, I displayed the same behavior that was modeled for me. And I didn't speak to anyone about my own challenges after losing him for close to 20 years. Here's my brother speaking.
Dad and I spent a lot of time driving to and from school, sports, band practice, etc. We often sat in silence. It felt awkward, like we both wanted to talk but weren't sure what to say. I was sitting in my room playing my bass guitar with the door closed, and out of nowhere, Dad came in and asked, "What do you think about God? Do you believe in God?" I was so taken aback that I didn't know how to answer such a big question on the spot. I said something about believing in some higher power, but not one singular being. He just shook his head in acknowledgement and walked out. We had a few interactions like that.
I wish I had been more helpful to my mother as she cared for my dad, but I just didn't know how hard it was for her. I wish I had asked my dad questions about his illnesses, but I didn't know how or what to ask. I wish we had talked more as a family about how we could have best supported each other before my dad died so that we could do the same for each other afterwards. We should have sought professional help as a family. At the end of the day, I wish more than anything that my dad talked to us about his illness and his death. And I wish that he understood that talking about difficult things and living a joyous, fulfilling life are not mutually exclusive. There is more strength in vulnerability than there is in stoicism, but that was not modeled for me. I learned a lot from my dad about joy, creativity, and how to appreciate just being alive. But he did not teach me about heartache. After his death, I did go to therapy and bereavement groups, and my mom checked in on me all the time, but it all felt like too little and too late. I just didn't find those things helpful because I was unwilling and unable to share my feelings. My experience of his death was like running a marathon without training, without warming up for the race. My body just wasn't prepared. It went into shock, and therefore, My recovery was not gentle, and it took a very long time. As I acknowledge anger that I feel towards my dad for his silence, I simultaneously feel comforted because now I know him as a whole person. He's no longer idealized for me, and that makes him more human. And he remains my hero. Knowing my parents' stories allows me to feel compassion and empathy for them, even in the face of anger. In the book, my mom wrote, Randy's sensitivity, emotion, and how he looked at life can be seen and felt through his photos. I couldn't agree more with this. While my dad did not speak openly about his anger regarding his disability, the injustice of his HIV infection, or his fear of death, I sense so much emotion in his photos. In them, I see and feel my dad's longing and lust for life. Photography gave him purpose. I think he funneled all that he couldn't say with words into his art. His identity as a photographer overpowered his identity as a sick person. When he died, he did not leave behind any departing message in a letter or video. Whatever he would have said is up to us to find in his photography. Working with his photos keeps me connected to my dad, and it's been the most fulfilling experience in my life. I view these reflections on my family as an expression of deep love, not of criticism. I do wish that some things were done differently, and I think that's normal for most people, and especially in a family with trauma. I acknowledge the difficult circumstances my parents faced, and of course, I know that hindsight is always 20/20. My parents gave my brother and me incredibly joyous, fun, and fulfilling childhoods. They modeled for us the value of family and the importance of maintaining strong and close relationships with the people we love. Their love for each other and for my brother and me is what gave me the resilience I needed to live a good and happy life, even in the presence of pain. I'll now return to my creative process. I compiled every story that I received into one document. I printed all 80 pages worth, and I went through everything with highlighters to note the content I wanted to keep for the book. After this initial edit, I created an edited stories document, printed it all again, and cut out each individual story. My wife and I created storyboards for the sequence of the book, and we decided to piece it all together chronologically so that the arc of the book would represent the arc of my father's life. The title of the book, Unburying My Father, came to me naturally. I had literally unburied my dad's entire photo collection, and subsequently the pieces of his life that I had always wanted to know about. Then my own buried story emerged. What began as an idea to simply share my father's photography with the world became an exploration of my own experience of loss. I recently read a book by the author Khaled Hosseini. In it, he wrote, "It is important to know your roots, to know where you started as a person. If not, your own life seems unreal to you, like a puzzle. Like you have missed the beginning of a story and now you're in the middle of it, trying to understand." As I came to understand my parents more fully, I consequently came to understand myself, which has healed me in powerful ways. The process of communicating this experience is exactly what I needed to do in order to redeem my past, heal my present, and move forward with a more open heart. I have sat with tears streaming down my face on most days that I've worked on this book. And I now understand how badly I needed to do that. Talking about my feelings has never been easy. My goal today is not to bring you to a dark or sad place, even if much of what I've shared is difficult. In the last month of my dad's life, he sent a holiday card out to all of his friends and family. It's the one you see pictured here. It's the photo of fireworks exploding in the sky, and underneath the photo it said, "Celebrate life." Those were his last words to many, many people. My story, my book, this talk are a celebration of life and an acknowledgement that that also includes the hard stuff. By sharing openly, you can support each other and build up your communities on a foundation of love and empathy. By remembering and honoring your loved ones, you choose not to ignore the past, but to embrace their impact. To me, that's a celebration of life. I want to thank Roots and Roads for inviting me here and for trusting me and providing this platform to share my story. I want to thank you all so much for listening. It's always such a pleasure to share this story, and I really appreciate your presence. Thank you.
Thank you, Zander. Why don't we just take a few moments in silence and let all that Zander shared with us wash over us. We have some time now for a conversation, or questions that you may have for Zander, or to just sharing some things that may have developed for you or come up for you. So I don't know if we can maybe go back to the gallery view where we can see everyone. And Jennifer is gonna give you all permission to unmute yourselves if you would like to say anything or ask anything. And you can also put comments or questions in the chat if you feel more comfortable doing that. Please, Phyllis, go right ahead.
Okay, hi, Zander. I volunteer for hospice, and I do a lot of grief support in my hospice volunteer work, and I've also been where you are, not to the same degree, but as a caregiver, you know, watching actually both of my parents a couple of years apart die, and I want to give you a lot of credit for your for everything that you've done, for your strength, you know, and for what you're bringing to the table for, you know, for other people, because not everybody understands this. And I think you've done God's work.
Thank you. Thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate it.
Zander, well, while we wait for maybe somebody else to share, a number of times you had expressed a wish that your family had talked more about your dad's illness, about anticipating his death, and what it would mean for each one of you. Can you, reflecting back and all that you've thought about, can you talk about how you feel that your grief might have been affected had some of those conversations taken place?
Yeah, thanks for that question. You know, like I said in the talk, when my parents shared that information about my dad having AIDS, to me, looking back now, should have and could have been the start of a conversation, not the end of a conversation. And I think that it's only fair, if that type of information is shared, that it's very intense and heavy with children, or even not with children. It needs to be a conversation that's talked about regularly. So I think that if my family had talked either amongst ourselves or with a professional, whether it be a mental health professional or even my dad's doctors or healthcare professionals, I think I would have been a lot more comfortable sharing my story much earlier in my life and talking about it with my friends, with people I meet. Like I said in the talk, I lived almost 20 years where almost no one knew what I went through. But at the same time, I was living this life of, I had tons of friends. I was a musician. I was very social. I had this kind of normal life on the outside. And I would be in conversations with, could be someone who I considered one of my best friends, and realize in that moment that they knew almost nothing about me, or at least nothing about the most important part of my life. And that was always really, really painful and difficult. And I'm so glad that I found this creative outlet, because I think this is my way of finally coming out, so to speak, with this life experience. So I think, to answer your question in short, it wouldn't have taken so long for me to start talking about this. And the heavy burden that grief often feels like maybe would have been lifted at a younger age.
Please, Susan, just go right ahead.
Thank you. You touched a lot of very tender parts in my heart. I think that even for adults, many times, so I'm a hospice chaplain. I was a hospice nurse previously. And I see all the time families that are struggling with, telling somebody in the family, or just talking about it, either with the person who is dying or with each other, or it just, many times it is the elephant in the room. So it's very hard even for adults to talk among adults. I just wanted to, put out there that Tucson is very, very fortunate to have an organization that exclusively works with grief in children and families. And it's called Tu Nidito, your little nest in Spanish. So unfortunately, Zander, I know that it won't help you, but I think that for anyone who is listening, who is in the Tucson area, if you have a chance to recommend that organization, I think it is very important. And like I say, as a nurse and as a chaplain in hospice, I have given their flyers or their name to families, because it is very hard. And my wonderful niece who lives with me had a difficult situation as a child. Within a year, she lost her aunt, my other sister, and her baby sister. And my sister, her mom, my sister never talked about it with her and her younger sister. She was 6 and her younger sister was 4. And we just recently had a wonderful conversation on the anniversary of my other sister, her aunt's death, 27 years later. And all she ever heard about my sister was that Cindy died by suicide. That's all she knew about my sister. And I'm like, oh my God, there are so many wonderful things that you could know about her. And
Mhm.
so we talked about it, and she was like, oh my God, she's just like your mom. Oh my God, she's just like you, So it is important to talk with kids. Anyway, I talked longer than I thought I was going to, but thank you so very much for sharing your story, because it is so important. And congratulations on your project, because it's amazing.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And I just wanted to say that just touch on what you mentioned about sharing some things about somebody's life and then realizing, oh, they're like you or they're like me. When I started to hear these stories from my father, or sorry, about my father, there were so many instances where I could take my father's name out and put my name in, and it would have applied. And that was so revelatory for me, because here I was thinking for 2 decades that the defining thing in my life is my dad's death. And all of a sudden I'm realizing, no, it's his life that is helping to define who I am. It's the life he lived. It's the wonderful person he was, and the attributes that I take from him, not that he died. And that completely changed my life. And so I think having that kind of conversation or sharing those types of stories are so important for that reason. Yeah,
I
please
want to
do.
talk for a second about the persistence of goodwill, which obviously was there with your wife and with you. One of the stories of my childhood is I stayed overnight with a favorite cousin when we were 11 and a half and 12. And she came down with an illness, and she died within several weeks. And my mother said, you are never to go to their house again, to your cousin Catherine, her mother, because seeing you and knowing that you lived and she died will make her too sad. So fast forward almost 40 years. And I'm telling this story to a guy who is doing typing of protocols about the HIV epidemic. And he's also a poet. And he says, you need to write a grief poem. So I did. And I gave the grief poem to my sister. My sister ran into my dear friend's mother on the street, handed her the poem. The mother got in touch with me immediately. She had kept a scrapbook all those years about my graduation from high school, et cetera, et cetera. She said to me, oh, I love your poem. I love when people talk about Katie Jean. That was the name of my little friend, my cousin.
Mm-hmm.
And Katie Jean had a little sister. Well, my grandson and I just went to visit them in Alaska this summer. And there's something about the persistence of love and goodwill that is absolutely amazing. And that poet guy, God bless him. And the creativity is often what frees you.
Yeah.
It was like a magic wand.
I totally agree. The magic wand effect totally happened for me. And for me, the magic was by using creativity, creating this book, this talk, all the different iterations of my project. It's very easy now to speak about my father, to speak about my experience, because I don't need to sit down and say, here's what happened to me. It's more like, which is fine to do, but it was always very difficult for me to do that. But now I can say, here's this really cool, interesting book I made or project I'm doing. Someone can easily ask what it's about, what did I do, and the conversation just opens. And I can't tell you how many times I've been sitting at a table with either friends or strangers asking me about this project, and then it turns into a story about what they went through or something that happened to their family member. And these deep human connections occur. And at the root of this that's the whole point of this project, is to facilitate those types of connections, and using creativity is, for me, it's been the best way to do it. And I think a lot of people would benefit from it too.
So this was shared in the chat with me and asked that I pass it along. So Zander, thank you so much for honoring us with the intimacy of your grieving journey. I'm 71 years old and will be divorced in the near future. This has caused me to turn and look at my past, all the way back to my upbringing, the death of my father when I was 8 years old, the loss of my 27-year-old son in 2001, and the impact of these traumas and others on my life. I don't know my parents, both now deceased, and the people who knew them are no longer around to collect stories from. Do you have any suggestions beyond genealogy on how I might fill in some of these gaps?
That's a really great question. In a way, I was lucky that my dad had such a large social network, and there was a lot of people I could reach out to. But I think that for me, what was helpful, and I don't know enough about your story to provide specific advice, I don't think, but thinking outside of the box of people that I knew. So yes, I of course knew my dad's best friend from college, who you heard talk a few times through the audio clips, but I had to kind of reach to find that gentleman from the Hemophilia Association of New York. I had to connect a lot of different dots to speak to a nurse that was on my dad's healthcare team. There were people that were difficult to reach, but represented parts of my dad's life that I was less familiar with, which helped paint a broader picture of his life. But maybe there's some other connective dots out there that are not necessarily just family members or people that knew them, but I would start with like seeing where they went to school, where they grew up, places they may have worked, what their interests were. It's the only way to really dig, is to try to use what you do know about that person. I'd also be happy to speak to you more in depth about this, but that would be, I hope that's helpful. I don't know if it is, but it's just it's a labor of love. And so if you have the time and the energy, keep digging. I wish I could give you more specific advice, but I hope that's helpful.
Zander, I don't want to discount all that you said. I had a coworker back during that time who also contracted HIV through a blood transfusion. She was ashamed because back then it was such a traumatic and such an awful thing to be HIV positive. Everyone judged you, everyone thought bad of you. And she was ashamed and refused to talk about it. And so as I hear you talk about your family, I just can't help but think how much that might have affected their ability to be open about it too. And I just am so sorry for all that you've been through, because I remember how much she struggled with her disease and no support, because she refused. I found out because she trusted me with something, but she refused to talk about it with anybody else. So thank you for your work.
Yeah, and thanks for saying that. There's a very important context to consider, which was that time period where it was obviously incredibly stigmatized. For me, one of the things that has made me reflect in the way I have done and the way I shared was, my parents did reach the point where they told us, they disclosed my dad's status. So to me, especially as a parent now, I think once the conversation gets started, it has to be continued. Obviously, I acknowledge how incredibly hard it would be to do that. I think that if they hadn't told us, maybe my reflections would be different. I think in retrospect, I would still wish that we had had conversations, but I do feel harmed in some way that there was that semi-opening of a conversation that then just got shut down. And so, but like I said in the talk, and I'll keep saying is I can't fathom the difficulty of having to speak to a child about that. But I do feel confident that we can, as a society and as people, speak to children about mostly any topic, not every detail of every topic. Obviously things have to be adapted, but I want to take that approach with my daughter of just being open and having a home of open communication. And that's a lesson I'll take with me for forever. But thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
Just thinking what Susan had mentioned as well about that organization here in Tucson, Tunedito. They came and spoke to us. I can't remember how long ago it was now. But one of the things that stuck with me was the importance of what you had been talking about, as well as the creative expressions of our feelings, to not simply try to rely on our words to express how we're feeling, but to be able to express that through movement and through drawing and through music and so many, and it allows us to get in touch with how we're feeling in ways that I don't think would be possible if we simply relied on conversation. And for kids, that can be liberating to be able to do that. I think it's more natural for us when we're younger, and oftentimes we as adults, I'll speak for myself, I have closed down some of those avenues, and it can be very helpful to be able to have those. And so I just want to thank you for lifting that up for all of us as a way of processing our grief.
Yeah, I totally agree. The one thing I remember most from the therapy and bereavement groups that I did when I was a young teenager, and maybe it was the only thing I remember being helpful, was creating I think they called it a memory pillow. And it was a simple project of just taking a pillow and gathering some objects that reminded me of my dad and kind of decorating the pillow with that. And this book feels like a very exaggerated version of that and a more mature version of it. But you're right. It's such a valuable form of expression. And I think, like I said in the talk, my dad was a grieving person. He dealt with a lot of loss. He lost his autonomy. He slowly lost his life. He wasn't able to do a lot of the things he wanted to do. And that is, a form of grief. And I think photography was his outlet. I do think too that when there's creative expression, or when creativity is used to process grief, there's the conversation that can come with it. Like what's behind the art? Why did you choose this medium? What does this photograph mean? Or what does this painting mean? And those are the types of conversations maybe my dad could have had if I was an adult or something like that. But I think creativity is art is just such a valuable way to share this and process it.
We have a music therapist, a musician in the room with us who has helped many people I know as they face the end of their life and their loved ones to get in touch with what's happening and what's present in the room in ways that wouldn't happen if she didn't play her harp. And so we've seen that many, many, many times. And it's been a blessing. So I want to lift that up for everyone, is to be able to find those outlets in whatever form that is, whatever your expression might be. It's a wonderful way to learn more about yourself and the folks around you.
Yeah.
Does anyone have anything else that they would like to share or to ask before we close? Well, I want to first thank all of you who have participated in this conversation. It's a very emotional and vulnerable space, and you all have made it one that I feel like we've gained a lot of insight from, and so thank you for your willingness to be vulnerable this evening. And I want to especially thank Zander for all that you brought to this discussion and the presentation, and for your amazing project and book. And just want to encourage folks to, could you tell us again, Zander, maybe the site that they can go to if they want to learn more about this project or see more about the book?
Yeah, I'm actually going to just type it into the chat here.
Great.
So it's randymasserphoto.com. And that's where you can, there's books for sale, there's prints, and there's more just information about the things I do in addition to the talks. I do workshops and have curated some photography exhibits, and staying pretty active around this project. And so you can check it out there.
Thank you.
Get to it.
And I want to invite everyone to next month's session as well. On the 16th of March, we're going to have another amazing presenter. If you don't know her yet, I encourage you to come to this. She's incredible. Rabbi Stephanie Aaron will be talking to us about writing our ethical wills. And, oftentimes when we think about wills, we think about who we're going to give our property or who we're going to leave our property to. And this is about what are we going to leave our loved ones, about what we value, what we have found meaningful, what we want them to hold on to, and maybe some things that have guided us that might be helpful to the next generation as they grapple with all the many questions that they're going to have to face after we're gone. So I encourage you all to register for this. Please register early, and because we want to probably, I think about a week before, send you something in the email that will help in the evening's conversation. So please go to our site and register at rootsandroads.org, and you can click on for our education series. All right. So thank you again, everyone, for taking part in this conversation. If you feel so moved, we would also invite you to make a donation to these efforts so that we're able to continue these education series and conversations that I think are invaluable to our whole community. So thank you again for being with us. We look forward to seeing you next month. Blessings to you all.